The most dangerous men in this city never frightened me. The little boy hiding beneath a restaurant table did. My name is Emily Carter, and on the night everything changed, I was 43 minutes away from finishing another double shift at Black Harbor Grill. My feet ached so badly I could barely feel my toes through my worn sneakers, my coffee had gone cold hours earlier, and the tip jar behind the register looked just as empty as my checking account. Outside, rain streaked across the front windows, turning the streetlights into blurry ribbons of gold. Inside, expensive wine glasses sparkled beneath soft chandeliers while people celebrated promotions, anniversaries, and business deals worth more than I would earn in 10 years. I carried another tray toward the private dining room, forcing the same polite smile I had practiced since I was 19. It wasn't fake exactly. It was survival. Then I heard the shouting. Not angry. Not cruel. Frustrated. Several voices overlapped as chairs scraped across polished hardwood. A woman wearing an expensive navy suit knelt beside one of the booths, speaking softly. Two security men stood nearby, uncertain and uncomfortable. A gray-haired gentleman kept repeating, "Come on, buddy. It's okay." Nobody noticed me until I rounded the corner. "Miss," one of the managers whispered urgently. "Stay back." But I looked anyway. A little boy, maybe 6 years old, was curled beneath the large round table, hugging his knees so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His breathing came in uneven bursts. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor as if the entire room had disappeared except for whatever memory was trapped inside his head. Someone reached toward him again. He pulled farther underneath the table without making a sound. That silence unsettled me more than crying ever could. Children usually cried when they were overwhelmed. This child had gone somewhere much quieter. Somewhere lonelier. I slowly lowered my tray onto an empty service station without taking my eyes off him. "Emily," my manager hissed. "Don't." I barely heard him. Instead of walking closer, I sat down on the hardwood floor several feet away. Close enough for the boy to see me. Far enough that he wouldn't feel cornered. I reached into my apron and found a folded cocktail napkin and a blue ink pen. Without saying a word, I began drawing the clumsiest little sailboat imaginable. The lines were crooked. The waves looked ridiculous. Even I had to smile. I placed the napkin on the floor between us and gently slid it halfway across the polished wood before folding my hands in my lap. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Rain tapped against the windows. Silverware clinked somewhere across the restaurant. Then, for the first time since I had walked into that room, the little boy slowly lifted his eyes and looked directly at me. The little boy stared at the crooked sailboat as though it had drifted in from another world. His pale fingers loosened around his knees by less than an inch, but after watching him for only a few seconds, I realized that an inch was everything. Nobody else in the room seemed to notice. They were too busy holding their breath, waiting for another outburst that never came. I stayed exactly where I was. I did not smile too hard. I did not speak too quickly. Children could hear pressure even when adults wrapped it in gentle words. I picked up my pen again and drew a tiny sun over the boat. It looked even worse than the boat itself. For a heartbeat, I thought I imagined it, but the corner of the little boy's mouth twitched. Not a smile. Just the memory of one. I quietly placed the pen beside the napkin and leaned back on my hands. "Your turn," I whispered. "Only if you want to." The room remained perfectly still. One of the security men shifted his weight before the woman in the navy suit raised a hand, silently telling him not to move. The boy looked at the pen. Then at me. Then back at the pen. Slowly, carefully, as if every movement required courage, he crawled forward just enough to reach it. Nobody breathed. He pulled the napkin closer and added a single stick figure standing inside the boat. The drawing was shaky, but deliberate. I felt something tighten in my chest. He was talking. Just not with words. That is a good captain, I said softly. He looks brave. The little boy glanced at me again, and this time he did not immediately look away. Before I could say another word, a deep voice echoed from the entrance behind us. Noah. The temperature in the room seemed to change. Every employee straightened instinctively. Every conversation from the nearby dining room faded into silence. I turned my head and saw a tall man standing beneath the doorway, reins still clinging to the shoulders of his perfectly tailored black coat. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with dark hair, steady blue eyes, and the calm expression of someone accustomed to making impossible decisions without raising his voice. Four men in dark suits stopped several steps behind him, but none dared move closer. His attention never left the child beneath the table. Then his eyes shifted toward me. There was no anger in them. Only disbelief. He had walked into the room expecting another failure. Instead, he found his son holding a blue pen and finishing a drawing beside a waitress nobody had noticed until tonight. Noah lowered the pen as his father took one slow step into the room. Nobody else moved. The servers froze beside their trays. The managers suddenly found the floor fascinating. Even the security men seemed to wait for permission to breathe. I stayed where I was on the hardwood floor because standing too quickly would have broken whatever fragile bridge Noah had built. The little boy looked at the man in the doorway, then quietly placed one hand over the paper boat as though protecting it. I had seen that gesture before. Children guarded the things that made them feel safe. The tall man noticed it too. His expression barely changed, but something softened behind his eyes before disappearing just as quickly. He stopped several feet away instead of rushing forward. Noah, he said again, his voice calm and steady. I am here. Noah did not answer. He simply looked toward me for a brief second before returning his attention to the drawing. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if I should excuse myself. Before I could stand, the man looked directly at me. How did you do that? He asked. His voice was low, controlled, almost curious. I blinked. Do what? He nodded toward his son. Everyone in this room has been trying to help him for nearly an hour. I looked down at Noah before answering. I did not try to handle him. The words came naturally. I listened before I expected anything from him. His eyes stayed on mine. Sharp blue. Careful. Measuring every word. You listened, he repeated quietly, as though testing whether the idea made sense. Children tell you what they need, I said. Sometimes they just do it without speaking. Noah picked up the pen again and drew another small stick figure beside the first one inside the little sailboat. I smiled without thinking. Looks like your captain found a friend. The little boy glanced at me, then gave the tiniest nod I had ever seen. A woman near the doorway let out a shaky breath she had apparently been holding for several minutes. The man in the black coat noticed the nod too. For the first time since he entered the restaurant, surprise replaced complete control. He crouched slowly instead of towering over his son. May I come closer? He asked. Noah hesitated before giving the slightest nod of his own. The man obeyed exactly, stopping where Noah's eyes seemed comfortable. He never reached out. Never forced a hug. He simply remained there. After another quiet moment, he lifted his gaze toward me once more. My name is Adrian Blackwell, he said. And I believe I owe you more than a simple thank you. Adrian Blackwell extended his hand toward me, but I remained on the floor beside Noah for another moment. It did not feel right to stand before the little boy was ready. Noah finished drawing a tiny flag on top of the sailboat and carefully placed the pen back onto the napkin. Only then did I slowly rise to my feet. My knees protested after sitting on the hardwood floor, and I brushed the wrinkles from my black apron with an embarrassed smile. You do not owe me anything, I said quietly. I was only trying to help. Adrian studied me with the kind of focus that made me feel as though he remembered every word I spoke. Most people try to solve problems, he replied. You chose to understand one. Before I could answer, my manager hurried toward us with an anxious smile that looked painfully forced. Mr. Blackwell, we sincerely apologize for the inconvenience this evening. We would be honored to provide anything your family needs. Adrian barely glanced at him. She already provided what my family needed. The room fell silent again. My cheeks warmed immediately. I was not used to compliments, especially not in front of half the restaurant. It really was nothing, I insisted. Children have difficult days just like adults do. Adrian looked toward Noah, who had finally crawled out from beneath the table with the folded napkin still clutched in his small hand. He stood quietly beside his father without speaking, but he was no longer trembling. That alone felt like a miracle to everyone else in the room. To me, it simply meant he finally felt safe enough to breathe. Adrian noticed the napkin. May I see your drawing? He asked his son. Noah hesitated before holding it out. Adrian accepted it with surprising care, as though someone had handed him a priceless painting instead of a wrinkled cocktail napkin covered with blue ink. His thumb paused over the two tiny stick figures standing together inside the sailboat. I watched something almost impossible happen. The corners of his mouth lifted into the faintest smile. It lasted only a second, but it changed his entire face. He has not drawn with anyone in almost 2 years, the woman in the navy suit whispered beside me. There was relief in her voice, and something that sounded very close to hope. Adrian folded the napkin carefully and slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat instead of throwing it away. Then he faced me once more. Emily, he said after reading the name stitched onto my uniform. Would you allow me to ask one more favor? I blinked, unsure where this conversation was leading. Before I could answer, Noah quietly stepped across the polished floor and wrapped his small fingers around the sleeve of my uniform, as though he had already decided what that favor should be. Noah's small hand barely weighed anything, yet when his fingers wrapped around the sleeve of my uniform, the entire room seemed to stop breathing again. He did not pull. He did not speak. He simply held on, as though letting go might send him back to whatever lonely place he had escaped only minutes before. I looked down at him, then back at Adrian. The powerful confidence that surrounded him had not disappeared, but something else had taken its place. Concern. Genuine and unmistakable. I think he wants you to stay a little longer, Adrian said quietly. I smiled at Noah. I still have tables waiting for me, buddy. Noah lowered his eyes but did not release my sleeve. Before the silence could become uncomfortable, Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed a sleek black business card. He held it toward me with calm certainty. I would like to offer you a position, he said. Not as a waitress. As someone who could spend time with Noah. I looked at the card but made no move to take it. I appreciate that, I answered carefully, but I am not qualified for something like that. You accomplished something tonight that highly trained professionals have not been able to accomplish in years. His voice remained respectful, never demanding. Qualifications are not always printed on paper. I shook my head gently. Children do not need someone who knows all the answers. They need someone willing to earn their trust. That is different. Adrian studied me for another long moment before giving the smallest nod. Then perhaps you could help us earn his trust again. The honesty in that sentence caught me off guard. Powerful people usually spoke as though they controlled every outcome. Adrian sounded like a father who had simply run out of ideas. My manager suddenly appeared beside me, smiling so hard I thought his face might crack. Emily, he said, if Mr. Blackwell is making you an opportunity, you should really consider it. I glanced at him, surprised by how quickly he had volunteered my future. I have not even heard the details, I replied. Adrian noticed my discomfort immediately. He slipped the business card back into his pocket instead of insisting I accept it. Then there will be no pressure, he said. If you choose to walk away after tonight, I will respect your decision. That answer relaxed me more than any amount of money could have. Before I could respond, Noah finally let go of my sleeve. Instead, he reached into his own pocket and carefully unfolded the wrinkled napkin with the little sailboat. He looked at it for a second before quietly placing it into my hands. It was the first gift he had offered anyone that evening, and somehow it felt far more valuable than the business card Adrian had almost given me. I folded the little napkin as carefully as if it had been made of glass and slipped it into my apron pocket. "Thank you," I whispered to Noah. He looked at the floor, but I could have sworn I saw his shoulders relax just a little more. My shift was not over, and reality slowly returned as another server hurried past carrying steaming plates toward the dining room. The restaurant was alive again, conversations replacing the heavy silence that had filled the private room only minutes earlier. My manager cleared his throat. "Emily, table 7 has been waiting." I nodded apologetically. I should get back to work. Adrian stepped aside without hesitation, creating a clear path instead of blocking it. "Of course," he said. "Duty comes first." That answer surprised me. Most wealthy customers I had served expected the world to pause for them. Adrian simply accepted that I had responsibilities beyond his family. As I picked up my serving tray, Noah watched every movement. Before I walked away, I crouched one last time until we were at eye level. "Keep drawing," I said softly. "You have good stories in there." He glanced toward his father, then back at me. His lips parted ever so slightly, as if a word had almost found its way out. None came, but he gave the smallest nod. Somehow, that felt enough. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of coffee refills, dessert orders, and polite smiles, yet my mind kept drifting back to the little boy with the blue pen. Every time I passed the private dining room, I noticed something different. Noah remained beside his father instead of hiding beneath the table. He quietly sketched on fresh sheets of paper that one of the staff had brought him. Adrian never interrupted him. He only watched with patient attention that seemed newly discovered. Near closing time, I carried the final receipt to their table. Adrian stood as I approached. "Thank you for staying," he said. "I know your work did not stop simply because ours did." I handed him the check with a small smile. "I was only doing my job." He looked at me for a thoughtful moment. "No," he answered gently. "Serving dinner was your job. What you gave my son tonight was a choice." I frowned slightly. "A choice?" Adrian nodded. "Everyone else expected him to enter our world. You entered his instead." Before I could respond, Noah reached into his pocket and carefully tore a small corner from the fresh sheet he had been drawing on. He held it toward me with quiet determination. On the tiny piece of paper was another crooked sailboat, but this time there were 3 stick figures standing together beneath the same little flag. When the restaurant finally closed, the silence felt different from the one that had settled over the private dining room earlier that evening. This silence carried relief instead of fear. I untied my apron, folded it over my arm, and reached into the pocket where Noah's little sailboat rested. I smiled without realizing it. It had been years since a simple drawing had felt more valuable than the cash tips I counted at the end of a shift. As I stepped outside, the rain had faded into a light mist that coated the empty sidewalks with silver reflections. My old sedan waited beneath a flickering street lamp, looking every bit as tired as I felt. I had just unlocked the driver's door when I heard measured footsteps behind me. I turned to find Adrian walking alone, his security team remaining several yards away with respectful distance. Without the crowded restaurant around him, he seemed less intimidating and somehow more human. "I hope I am not interrupting," he said. "You are not," I answered. "I was just heading home." He nodded before reaching into his coat, not for a business card this time, but for the folded drawing Noah had made during dinner. "He asked me to make sure you did not leave without this." He handed me the picture with careful hands. The second drawing showed the same little sailboat, but the 3 stick figures now had smiling faces. My chest tightened unexpectedly. He drew smiles, I whispered. Adrian looked down at the paper before speaking. He has not done that since his mother passed away. His voice remained steady, but I heard the weight beneath every word. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The city hummed quietly around us while distant headlights reflected across the wet pavement. Emily, he finally said, would you allow me to explain why I asked you to help Noah? I leaned against my car and listened. For 2 years, specialists, tutors, counselors, and caregivers have all tried to reach him. They arrived with plans, schedules, and methods. Tonight, you arrived carrying coffee stains on your apron and a blue pen. I laughed softly. That is not exactly professional equipment. Perhaps professionalism was never what he needed. He looked toward the restaurant entrance where Noah stood inside beside the front window, his small hand resting against the glass as he watched us. Adrian's expression softened again. He has spent 2 years believing the world only takes things away. Tonight, for the first time, someone gave him something without expecting anything back. I followed his gaze toward Noah. The little boy lifted the drawing in his own hands and gave me one small wave. Without thinking, I smiled and waved back, unaware that the simple gesture was about to change all 3 of our lives in ways none of us could possibly imagine. I drove home that night with Noah's drawings resting on the passenger seat instead of tucked away in my bag. Every red light tempted me to look at them again. 2 crooked sailboats. 3 smiling stick figures. They were simple enough for a child to draw in less than 5 minutes, yet somehow they carried more hope than anything I had seen in years. My apartment greeted me with familiar silence, the kind that settled into the walls after long workdays and lonely evenings. I heated a bowl of canned soup, changed into an old sweatshirt, and placed the drawings on my tiny kitchen table where I could see them while I ate. Sleep should have come easily after a 12-hour shift, but my thoughts refused to slow down. I kept wondering how a little boy could speak so clearly through pictures while so many adults struggled to say what they felt. The next morning, my alarm rang at 6:30, though I had slept barely 4 hours. I hurried through my routine, grabbed my keys, and opened my apartment door only to stop in surprise. A small white envelope rested neatly against the welcome mat. There was no stamp. No address. Only my first name written across the front in careful handwriting. Inside was a folded note. Emily. Thank you for giving my son a peaceful evening. There is no obligation attached to this letter. No expectation. Only gratitude. If you ever decide you would like to visit Noah again, the number below will reach me directly. Adrian. Beneath the message was a phone number and nothing more. No company logo. No expensive business card. Just a father asking another human being for help. I slipped the note into my purse before leaving for work, uncertain whether I would ever use it. By lunchtime I had almost convinced myself the previous evening had been nothing more than an extraordinary coincidence. Then my phone vibrated during my break. It was a text message from an unfamiliar number. A photograph appeared on the screen. Noah sat at a breakfast table wearing the same blue sweater from the restaurant. In front of him lay another drawing. The little sailboat had become larger, the water calmer, and the 3 stick figures were still together beneath the same tiny flag. Under the picture was a single sentence. He drew this after breakfast. It is the first thing he has drawn this morning in 2 years. Thank you. I stared at the screen much longer than I meant to. Before I realized what I was doing, my fingers typed a reply. Please tell Noah the captain is doing a wonderful job. A few seconds later, 3 small dots appeared as Adrian began writing back. Instead of his reply, another picture arrived. Noah was holding my note in both hands, and for the first time, the faintest genuine smile had found its way onto his face. For the next several weeks, our conversations never began with grand promises or complicated plans. They began with drawings. Every morning Adrian sent a picture of whatever Noah had created before breakfast, and every evening I replied with another crooked sketch of my own during my dinner break. A lighthouse. A bird. A cloud that looked suspiciously like a potato. My artistic talent remained terrible, but Noah never seemed to mind. Little by little, his pictures became brighter. The waves around the sailboat grew calmer. The sun appeared more often. One Saturday afternoon, I finally accepted Adrian's invitation to visit their home, not because of the beautiful estate waiting beyond the gates, but because a little boy had asked if I would draw another boat beside him. The mansion was elegant without feeling cold, yet the room that mattered most was the small corner Noah had quietly transformed into an art space. Colored pencils filled neat jars. Sketchbooks covered a low table by the window. As soon as he saw me, Noah hurried over carrying a blank sheet of paper. He sat on the floor exactly as we had that first night, waiting patiently. I joined him without hesitation. Adrian remained several feet away, giving us space while pretending to read through a stack of documents that never seemed to hold his attention for very long. We spent the afternoon drawing oceans, tiny islands, smiling birds, and far too many sailboats. Then something unexpected happened. Noah tapped my sleeve, pointed toward the little captain we had drawn together, and spoke so softly I almost wondered if I had imagined it. Home. The single word barely rose above a whisper, but Adrian heard it. I looked up just in time to see him lower the papers in his hands. His eyes glistened with quiet emotion he made no attempt to hide. He crossed the room slowly, knelt beside his son, and simply rested a gentle hand on the floor between us instead of interrupting the moment. Noah looked at his father, then back at our drawing. Home, he whispered again, this time with more confidence. Adrian closed his eyes for one brief second before smiling the same rare smile I had seen on the night we first met. Yes, he answered softly. Home. I realized then that I had never rescued anyone. I had not performed a miracle, solved an impossible mystery, or changed the world with extraordinary talent. I had simply chosen to sit on the floor beside a frightened little boy and wait until he was ready to let someone into his quiet world. Sometimes the greatest kindness is not speaking louder. It is listening longer. And sometimes the strongest man in the room is not the one who commands respect, but the father who learns that love begins the moment he kneels beside his child instead of asking the child to stand alone.